You know,
That's true.
Yeah.
you're gonna say him or saw that or heard that. So.
No,
Yeah,
concert is good.
If they want to take their time with that, I'll take the fall, and or if it means someone else doesn't get watched.
That is knowing hell.
Well, yeah, that reminds. We'll talk about that when I talk about the book recommendation at the end because it reminds me of something in there. But anyway,
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, we're going into colonization and Christianization. Interesting stuff. We're moving into the new world, and we're going to read a new interpretation of colonization and the kind of the place of witch hunts and witch burnings and legal regimes that are imposed on native populations and labor. That's how I would generalize this chapter. It's pretty short, but maybe we'll start with her thesis here. She says, the history of the body and the witch hunt that I have presented is based on an assumption that is summed up by the reference to Caliban the witch, the characters of the Tempest symbolizing the American Indians' resistance to colonization. The assumption is the continuity between subjugation of the population of the New World and that of people in Europe, women in particular, in the transition to capitalism. So this is pretty, she's, I guess, the kind of between the lines here, she's again talking about biopolitics and a Marxist critique of history, of capitalism. In both cases, we have the forcible removal of entire populations from the land, large-scale impoverishment, and the launching of Christianizing campaigns, destroying people's autonomy and communal relations. We also have a constant cross-fertilization whereby forms of repression that have been developed in the old world were transported to the new and then re-imported into Europe. Yeah. Yeah, of course, the Christianization here, as we'll see, kind of services both the biopolitics of controlling of the populations and labor analysis in its ideological form and institutions that it creates. Yeah, I don't know, any thoughts or the next part I have would be the next page.
Just that I think the first, maybe even 2 times I read this chapter, I thought that it felt a little bit like a book that was ready to end already.
That's exactly my thought.
I've on this reread, I have come to see it more as the rest of the book has had profound impact because it's very explicit and large and overt. Whereas in this chapter, it's far more of a notion of talking about the profundity that you find in the subtleties. So like a totally trivial example that has little, not none, but almost none political weight is the Northern Mexican holiday Dia de los Muertos, right? Traditional name for it is Dia de Muertos. English translation for it, Day of the Dead. The back translation for it is Dia de los Muertos. It has now come to be called its Spanish translation of the English translation of the Spanish translation of the holiday that was stolen from the Mayan people and sort of recapitulated into this All Saints Day, All Souls Day, All Hallows Eve, right? Yeah. And so it's like an endless iterative process of filing off serial numbers.
Well, and not to mention Spanish is a colonizer's language that
Right.
forced upon them. Yeah, I think there is cultural exchange normally, but when it's kind of in this um, master-slave relationship, it's more heavily leaning towards one way.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't have anything on this, but the
Yeah.
first paragraph until the next page.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I share that. There's a lot of kind of literature review happening in this chapter, and it's pretty quick. But yeah, so we get both these works. I mean, she mentions a couple of works. This is 220 demonstrate that also in the New World, witch hunting was a deliberate strategy used by the authorities to instill terror, destroy collective resistance. We've seen this before. Silence entire communities and turn their members against each other. It was also a strategy of enclosure, which, depending on the context, could be enclosure of land, bodies, or social relations. After all, as in Europe, witch hunting was a means of dehumanization. As such, the pragmatic form of repression serving to justify enslavement and genocide. Yeah, I mean, do these crimes happen under the banner of witch hunt in the New World? Is it's a big claim, but we'll see.
But
This is
I do like the kind of tying of the enclosures to it, because it's what
Sure.
it was. You're taking
Right.
land that people were using and fencing it up and using it for cattle, probably, or tobacco or cotton.
Yeah.
But I think it's also
It's
it
fixed.
is really important to talk about the first off that the enclosure is ongoing, and then second off that the enclosures are like she says, enclosures of social relations as well, right? So it's like ways to reform the social relations, unless that that there's some like necessary link between witch hunting and performing these functions, and more that witch hunting is the distilled version of what it looks like when someone tries to perform all of these functions at once.
Mhm.
That like witch hunting is the natural consequence rather than the cause.
I mean, I think she might agree with that, or is implying witch hunting is not necessarily a certain kind of process, but something that ends up creating a patriarchal family unit in this way that we've been reading in the book.
Hmm.
Whether that happens how it did in Europe or how it does in the Americas.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, then she says, witch hunting did not destroy the resistance of the colonized due primarily to the struggle of women. The connection of American Indians with the land, the local religions, and the nature survived beyond the persuasion, providing for more than 500 years a source of anti-colonial and anti-capitalist resistance.
Yeah, I think one of the differences being that the workers in Europe, they believed in all the Christian rhetoric and the devil. Here you have to convince them of that and then tell them that the devil is making them do all these things.
Yeah, no, that is true, and I guess then you can talk
Well, not convince,
about.
but forcibly convert. More or less.
Right. That's why witch hunting is the paradigmatic form of enclosing the social relations, is because you simultaneously enclose the social relations into a Western modality and enclose the land and enclose the bodies. Because like the process of convincing someone the devil is real and then saying, now that you believe it's real, I also need you to believe that you're possessed by it, and that's why I need to burn you to death, right? In the like supplice of fire. Like that is
Yeah.
witch hunting.
Yeah, and I think, and I am guilty of this too, like thinking of witch hunting as it's passed on to us now in what she talks about in the later sense, where it becomes this isolated crime rather than a social crime. So
Right.
you're not doing it to individual natives, it's to their whole society, the whole group is their
Right?
mission.
Like the auto da fe ritual, where they literally wait until they have a critical enough mass, because they, on the one hand, they don't want to like waste their administrative labors organizing a witch trial for too few of people, and on the other hand, the impact of it won't be big enough if it's too few people, or in some ways probably if it's too many people, right? In this sort of like the Roman modality of like decimation notion, where you like take out exactly 10% so that you hobble, you teach a lesson, but you don't destroy.
Yeah, I don't know in the this like the language of colonialization. I mean, from the beginning, the church and the states. I mean, you're talking about Spain and
Mm,
Portugal, right, and then Italy, and even later on Germany and stuff, France. But I don't know. I'm not aware of. I've read a lot of in term of international law. Read a lot of those early documents of how like these edicts are working and these orders are working, and they're definitely Christian in tone, and they're definitely dichotomies of believers and who is Otu, and then there's somewhat vigorous debate, especially when people start coming back from these expeditions. I guess I don't see him as in this witch hunting um embedded in that language or justification, because
mm,
they're very clear about what they want. I mean, it is the orders, the papal bulls that are being sent are there's clear discussion of land and territory
right.
and material goods. Because I mean, of course, explorers always promise there'll be silver and gold.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I guess I'm sure there are instances of it. And then the part where she says in that very section, she says, um, destroy collective resistance, silence entire communities. Where was it? Where she says that primarily to the struggle of women. I guess that part also I don't see that even if there's not patriarchal organizations of societies and kind of modalities of relations are
Mhm.
different, still like the warrior classes in a lot of these places, at least the ones that were encountered and recorded to struggle against Europeans
Mhm.
in the more brutal, I mean, in the more battle sense, were men in a lot of these instances. I mean, especially in Northern America.
Well, I think that
Um,
she's saying that European women in particular,
no, yeah, okay.
that like this is part of the back channel feed, that like because in a couple pages she talks about how at the
Yeah,
top of 222. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, well, just on the women, because their plan wasn't for the witch hunts, it was because they're trying to create more workers, more people. They're not really, they're trying to, they're trying to get the land, and if they exterminate the native people living there, so be it. They're not really trying to bring up birth rates or anything. So I don't think the focus would be on women in the Americas.
Yeah, I mean that there's
Not for
still
a long time
slavery.
anyways.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the like the early portions of the transatlantic slave trade are all men, right? And it's not until
Yeah,
later.
it's not until they stop the slave trade where they you have to, like, she even talks about this a few chapters before. Then it all of a sudden becomes like this, total biopolitical system.
Mhm.
Yeah, and she says here, this is extremely important for us at a time when a renewed assault is being made on the resources and modes of existence of indigenous populations across the planet, for we need to rethink how the conquistadors strove to subdue those whom they colonized, what enabled the latter to subvert their plan, and against the destruction of their social and physical universe, create a new historical reality. Yeah. I mean, okay. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
we'll see.
to me that means this primitive accumulation is ongoing, and looking at how it occurred then, see how it's occurring now and resisted.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, you especially think of, for example, like in the Amazon. I mean, these battles have really taken legal and international dialogue. I mean, there's hardly yeah, anyways, but yeah, let's, so then we go to the birth of cannibals here. Maybe we do want to read this. I I did not highlight this, but she says, when Columbus sailed the Indies, the witch hunt in Europe was not yet a mass phenomenon. Nevertheless, the use of devil worship as a weapon to strike at political enemies and vilify entire populations like Muslims and Jews was already common among the elite. More than that, Seymour Phillips writes, a persecuting society had developed within medieval Europe, fed by militarism and Christian intolerance that looked at the other as mainly an object of aggression. Thus, it is not surprising if cannibal, infidel, barbarian, monstrous races, and devil worshippers were the ethnographic models which the Europeans entered the new age of expansion.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's very true.
I also
It's
think that this
yeah.
answers one of the things that we're talking about, is that like I don't really know what the etymological roots of cannibal is, but the historical specificity on infidel, barbarian, and monstrous races is the enemies of the Crusaders, the people of the Barbary coast, the Carthaginians who fought the Romans, and the monstrous races are Jews, right? Like these are the most important part of the like syntactical shuffle, is when we forget the roots. And so then we can just carry all the old animosity with it without having it be subject to a critical analysis.
Yeah.
Because it's no longer about like, people don't have an association of barbarian in particular. I think it's the strongest case there. People don't have an association of barbarian with the people who live on the Moroccan coast, right? But that's what it means in its strict sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember during the Iraq and Afghanistan invasion, like it kind of became a thing among some of the troops to like get infidel tattoos. So it was kind of a reversal, almost as like a proto attempt at triggering the Muslim population you're going
Sure.
to like annihilate. Um, Bizarre. Anyways,
Yeah, and for me, monstrous, I always go back to kind of the Victorian fear of a kind of bleeding into breaking boundaries, like a Frankenstein crossing over from living to dead, man, human, animal, man, woman. These would all be monsters.
mhm. Yeah,
So
and
kind of yeah.
that definitely comes up with Savage here. Says This is the 16th century. This was the time of mass baptisms, when much zeal was deployed and convinced the Indians to change their names and abandon their gods and sexual costumes, especially polygamy and homosexuality. Bare-breasted women were forced to cover themselves. Men in loincloth had to put on trousers. But at this time, the struggle against the devil consisted mainly of bonfire of local idols, even though many political and religious leaders from the central Mexico were put on trial and burned at the stake by the Franciscan Father Juan de Zumárraga in the years between 1536, when the Inquisition was introduced in South America, and 1543, and also Cuba, by the way. A lot of burning of people. Yeah, and I guess this kind of savage corresponds that to that idea of monster, which is also being deployed in the context of exporting sugar, which suddenly floods and creates cultures around the world because of the amount of it that's going out and how consumable it is. Thus, despite the earlier homilies about the gentle Taínos and or Tainos, an ideological machine was set in motion, complementing the military one that portrayed the colonized as filthy and demonic beings, practicing
All kinds of abominations.
yeah, all kinds of abominations. I got so much shit on my screen from Zoom. While the same crimes that previously had been attributed to lack of religious education, sodomy, cannibalism, incest, cross-dressing, were now treated as signs that the Indians were under the dominion of the devil and they could be justifiably deprived of their lands and their lives. In reference to this image, Fernando Cervantes writes in The Devil in the New World, 1994, before 1530 would have been difficult to predict which one of these views would emerge as a dominant one. By the middle of the 16th century, however, a negative demonic view of Amerindian cultures had triumphed, and its influence was seen to descend like a thick fog on every statement, official and unofficial, made on the subject. Yeah. Yeah.
I think she does a good job of pointing out the I don't know what to say, the charges that are loaded with a specifically negative value. And I also think it's important on the top of 221, that first or the bottom of the first paragraph, where it says some reports also stressed as a sign of their bestiality their propensity to share and give everything they have in return for things of little value. That like anything that's divergent from a Christian norm will be weaponized.
Yeah, and Christian norm, I guess, is kind of European high culture, right? I mean, it's a very specific form of Christianity. And I guess this part was interesting because she wants to warn against interpretation as culture shock. Similarly, the cannibalistic rituals they discovered in America, which figure prominently in the records of the conquest, must not have been too different from the medical practices that were popular in Europe at the time. And she goes to kind of talk about a lot of kind of the use of flesh and blood and bones, for cures and shit like that. Then she says, thus the new horror that the Spaniards felt for the Aboriginal population after the 1550s cannot be easily attributed to a culture shock, but must be seen as a response inherent to the logic of colonialization that inevitably must dehumanize and fear those it wants to enslave. I think that's very true. I mean,
Yeah, that made me think of Montaigne on cannibals, his essay on cannibals, because he kind of makes that.
Oh,
argument.
yeah.
He's like, look at us, we do these strange things, like we're
Right.
checking them.
Right.
But go back because I wanted to highlight that next paragraph. It's about like a case. Um, Juan Jiménez de Sepulveda on whether or not the Indians were to be considered as human beings would have been unthinkable without an ideological campaign representing the latter as animals and demons. But I just wanted to point out the footnote that she writes, the theoretical foundation of Sepulveda's argument in favor of the enslavement of the Indians was Aristotle's doctrine of natural slavery. Just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. 7. Yeah.
yeah. Did you want to read it or?
Oh, that was it.
That was it.
Okay, you read it.
Yeah, she
Okay.
was just pointing out that used Aristotle.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah. About the cannibalistic rituals section, this is another example of the sort of the backwards infiltration of these norms is sort of like the ways in which medical anatomical theater were charged with sepulchral defiling, and the ways in which this kind of behavior among the nobility of the sort of drinking of flesh tinctures became itself evidence of like some being a member of one of the secret societies. This kind of stuff is like as it goes out and then it comes back home, if it's happening over there and it's evil, well, it must be evil here too. And it's part of the force of stopping that among the European gentry.
yeah, it's like kind of an ethical boomerang that changes stuff at home.
Right. And then on 222, I have two notes. One is in the paragraph under the block quote, where says, yet when we read Bartolome de las Casas' account of the destruction of the Indies or of any other account of the conquest, we wonder why should the Spaniards have been shocked by this practice when they themselves had no qualms committing unspeakable atrocities for the sake of God and gold. And according to Cortes, in 1521, they had slaughtered 100,000 people just to conquer Tenochtitlan. I think it's important to say that, like, it's tempting to read hypocrisy in, but these people are like earnest, zealous, true, dyed-in-the-wool believers in what they're doing and see no hypocrisy. And that's precisely why, that's precisely their most dangerous characteristic.
Yeah, because you could turn around and say, well, why were the Aztecs worried when they do these things to themselves anyway? Well, they're both doing
Right.
it for like their
Right.
own reasons and that are
Right.
inexplicable
Right.
to each other.
And that ties directly into the other note, which is on the paragraph that you read, James, the beginning of it. How successful was the strategy can be seen from the ease with which the Spaniards rationalized the high mortality rates caused by the epidemics that swept the region in the wake of the conquest, which they interpreted as God's punishments for the Indians' beastly conduct. Right? That's exactly the point, is that they're just like something that they are responsible for, though it is, again, important to recognize the ways in which they're responsible for what will later be, when done purposively, a bioweapon, is due to lack of a science about germs. They do zealously and earnestly interpret as God's punishment, and then later, it will be many centuries later before people figure out that you can use this as a weapon. Not that it hasn't been done earlier in history than this, but it just wasn't part of the European repertoire at this point.
Yeah, and they might, well, yeah, there was lots of launching bodies with catapults over walls and stuff, but they didn't know the science of it. But they might even justify their own actions as God's punishment. I killed this person, I killed all these people. that must be,
Absolutely.
and I'm a godly person, so,
I am the agent of
therefore,
God's
yeah.
punishment. Right.
And I'm actually helping God because his earlier punishment didn't quite take out all of them. So we have to go help him out.
Yeah, and a lot of these foot soldiers that are doing the work, I mean, they're from the lower classes.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, they're being led by people of upper echelons and priests and whatnot. But yeah,
Yep.
And you're suddenly thick of it, right? You're suddenly just in a new world. Much easier to, I presume, to massage away some of those kind of ethical intuitions, but you still need justification. I thought this was Johann Ludwig Gottfried, which displays a number of
Yeah.
horrific
I
images.
just want to say that's something that
Yeah.
happens in every kind of situation of war like that,
Sure.
it's just a natural thing to do. And it makes me think of that one of the Black Mirror episodes where they were like it was like soldiers where they thought they were fighting aliens, but it was just some kind of goggles that made them see normal people in whatever country the US was invading at the time as aliens.
I mean, that book on killing that guy that went on to train cops, the military guy, it's very interesting. I mean, that book is about how hard it is to train a human being to shoot another human being in war. And then he has, all these statistics and stuff, how many times people misfire and not shoot, then he goes on to say as a military does it. Yeah. And then he spends his days and actually just only recent years journalists been going after and being what this guy's up to, which is like the warrior mentality in cops, right? How to protect yourself, which is always responding with violent intuition.
Right.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware those were the same people. Yikes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, Sean read that book too.
Yeah.
Like,
I think I read
this
it
guy
'cause-
seems to be against this. I was like,
Yeah. Yeah, Shirley recommended it, or Shirley, I think it was reading one of her classes a long time ago. That's where I read it first. So
that might have been why I picked it up, to be honest. Yeah. It was a while ago when that book came out.
Wild. I would not have expected those two people to be the same. Fuck.
Yeah, then this kind of goes on to show some of these images. Exploitation, resistance, and demonization here. We're kind of on the same themes. This part was interesting, I thought. Until the 1550s, despite the massacres and the exploitation associated with the system of encomienda, the Spaniards had not completely disrupted the subsistence economies which they have found in the areas they colonized. Instead, they had relied for the wealth they accumulated on the tribute system put into place by the Aztecs and the Incas, whereby this designated chiefs, I'm not gonna pretend to pronounce these, delivered them quotas of goods and labor supposedly compatible with the survival of the local economies. The tribute which the Spaniards exacted was much higher than the Aztec and Incas had ever demanded of those they conquered, but it was still not sufficient to satisfy their needs. By the 1550s, they were finding it difficult to obtain enough labor for both the Abrejas manufacturing workshop where goods were produced for the international market, and the exploitation of the newly discovered silver and mercury mines, like the legendary one at Potosi. Yeah, just very. I guess this is a form of. It's not cellular colony. It's just it's a very bizarre way of keeping their lives intact to some form and then just using him as taxing him and using him as slave
It's
labor.
parasitism. They're
Yeah.
leeching onto a system that seems to work because it talks about how they charging a lot more than where people who have been conquered were charged. Like it seemed like they had been set up or evolved into a system that was somewhat
Mhm.
stable. You could have a little bit of conquering. Everyone knew who was in charge, but you wouldn't like lose everything if you got conquered. You just had to pay tribute to them. And they come in and they're like, no, we're exploitative. We're trying to get as much, we're trying to grab everything and run. We're looting this place really. And the
Mhm.
best way is just latch onto this thing that's working and try to pump out as much as we can.
Yeah, what's insane is that the scene must have been gruesome. I mean, they must have slowly watched this empire that they just conquered, not, just by the sheer use of excessive power that they just happen to not have, like slowly destroying these people and killing them to the point where the operations can't go any further.
Right.
And that the population can't even keep up with. Like, as kind of Mombas goes, like it's like going from biopolitics to kind of death politics,
Mm.
Necropolitics.
necropolitics. Sorry, yeah, yeah. Anyways,
Yeah, I mean, there's ample. The Spanish and Portuguese in particular were relatively fond of that tactic all along the eastern coast of Africa, the southern coast, and the south, or yeah, the eastern, from like the Horn of Africa down around the Cape and up almost into the West African area. And the West African area, they just sort of started exploiting much earlier in an extractive way because it was much closer. But previously, like a lot of the things that later became colonial relationships, say like in Angola, were organizations that started out purely as a tributary relationship. It just changed whichever, it was no longer the Congolese in charge. Now it's the Germans, or I think it was
Yeah, and
whatever.
I think especially the Portuguese, because they kind of started the mid-Atlantic slave trade, they ramp it up too. Like there was slavery there, but it wasn't like
Right.
serious. It wasn't on the same scale as it became once the Europeans started like doing the same thing as here. We're just gonna up everything and um, scale it up till it like destroys the communities there.
yeah,
Yeah, I guess I bring that up to say that like the historical moment they're coming out of as they're pivoting towards the new world is one in which they already have a well-established sub-Saharan African relationship norm that is one of tributary client relationships. And so it makes sense to that they are pivoting to the new world with functionally the same kind of relationships. And probably because of the excess transport distance is the single biggest reason they're demanding unsustainable tribute. Right? If they're going to send a shipment at all, they're going to send 12 large ships or whatever it is. They're going to send a giant fleet that's going to transport a massive amount of treasure back, and it needs to justify the economics of it.
Yeah, and there's all these kind of ideas about and they were expected to bring back all this gold, and there's talk about how much gold there is everywhere.
yeah, silver, especially.
Silver.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting that the Portugal and Spain
Yeah.
like become the longest incubators of fascism.
Hmm.
Both like 70 plus years of fascism, 60s, but of fascist rule, way after Germany falls. You're talking about very recent history.
Mhm.
And I wonder what
better.
that can, huh?
Portugal's better now. It's kind of socialist-ish.
Yeah, that's Spain too, but
Yep.
god damn, it took them
Yeah,
like total
maybe
military
we'll
rule.
get there in 70 years.
I mean, that's an interesting one. I mean, you're talking about South Korea too, actually, and Japan. But I feel like what these people did is actually like let history happen. You know, I think Sean was saying something very interesting about the January 6th, which I share. I was like, we should have left it. I wish, the Trump's like drivers had not driven to White House and let him go to Congress, and then they would have sat there with his bodyguards and stuff, took over, like letting antagonisms unfold,
Yeah,
rather than like keep like being pushing them back.
yeah, be like you
Yeah.
peed in Nancy Pelosi's plants. Now what are you
I
gonna
know,
do?
like, yeah,
We
exactly.
got no
That's what
place
that
to
was
put that.
my exact response. Is like they'll be there for like a month. I mean, he wouldn't survive a month there. Maybe he would, but and
He
they're like,
doesn't want to be
okay,
around.
fine. Now you have to rule. Like you guys have to like do laws and become bureaucrats and I don't know, figure out like the rate of mail delivery system in different regions. You know what I mean? And like, yeah, you guys are not even like at least fascists would do work. You know?
And Trump wouldn't want to spend time with those people anyway. He wants to
Fuck
spend time
no.
with people who make him look good, or make
Hates
him look
those
rich. Yeah.
people. I love it. There's in this new documentary that the British guy was doing on them, like in that trailer that liberals sending each other. There's this point when they showed Don Jr. like he just done a rally, and then he's just like washing his hand like crazy in a sink. And I was like, these people are disgusted by their fans. You know what I mean? Um, sorry, I know this is a digression, but history, you got to account for what comes. There are different kind of portrait of resistance and kind of different forms of genocide. I don't really see a way of going through all of them. That's why, like, this passage kind of jumped out to me here. It's like, this is especially in Huacas, I think, still. It says idols were destroyed, temples burned, those who celebrated native rites and practiced sacrifices were punished by death. Festivities such as banquets, songs, dances, as well as artistic and intellectual activities, painting, sculpture, observation of stars, hieroglyphic writing, suspected of being inspired by the devil were forbidden, and those who took part in them mercilessly hunted down. And this kind of happens in these different areas. I don't know if y'all had anything specific to salvage out of that.
Not out of that section. It's more of a testimonial, I
Yeah.
think important to have the narrative and understand the specifics, but I didn't find anything to do with it. I have something on the next page, but around 227. But
Yeah, let's do it.
this is I'm not actually sure how relevant it is, but it's something that's jumped out at me as very interesting. Top of the page or top of the paragraph, further a resettlement program, Reducciones, was introduced, removing much of the rural population into designated villages so as to place it under a more direct control. The destructions of the Huacas and the persecution of the ancestor religion associated with them was instrumental to both, since the resettlement program gained strength from the demonization of the local worshiping sites. And in this way, like, it's first off, there's like a pretty direct parallel to the ways in which her claim about the witch hunts and the enclosures cooperated together. I think that's interesting on its own. But then on the sort of process philosophy angle, I almost think you could define that the Platonic notion of the city at fever pitch as a process of moving a rural population into designated villages so as to place it under more direct control.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if that's separable from being a city. So it may be,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I remember. I distinctly remember if this Foucault's lecture on biopolitics. He talks about that.
Mhm.
How does the kind of proximity shift? But I think in our discussion of Europe there's a bit of that too.
Because Plato's notion is of the city at fever pitch is that the city exists so as to make it possible for some people to do things like philosophy. That philosophy is defined by the existence of the city, right? And though that's his like primary angle, it's the point stands for many other fields other than philosophy as well, like management, or the highest forms of management, ruling. And if that's the case, then if the city exists to create the potential for the caste, or the union of class and job, whatever that's called, then the city exists primarily as a form of placing people under a directed control.
I mean, James is the Plato guy here, but I think like those can be attributed more to Aristotle than Plato, especially the caste and all that. And it's more fundamental than that, like with him, because it's you're talking about friendship and ethics and all that, which need the city to develop. I don't know, like James, if you can direct us here.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm familiar with the city at fever pitch idea, but yeah, what you're saying is, to me, actually think of Confucianism first, like that this maybe the social structure exists to kind of make people these things is like this kind of these roles defining who people are. But yeah, I think it would fit with Plato in the sense that, thinking of the Republic, the city's there, this is all there to make sure people know which class they're in, which
Right.
kind of metal
That's where
I don't know, but the Republic is not
But the
really a
Republic,
prescriptive thing.
yeah, it's
I
the
mean,
Republic is also about looking into this, making the soul big enough as a city so that you can actually look inside of it,
yeah, right.
Who-
It's
yeah.
a city of hypotheticals, because that conversation starts with justice, right? I mean, it's really is yeah. So
Yeah,
I don't.
but I mean that framework of the city for justice, well, whatever, I'm not going to go into that. Just going to say that like the need for justice itself comes from the existence of the city. So
Sure.
yeah. I mean, I think, yeah. I'm
But
even
I just
thinking
think he's
more
a
like
military dude, right?
what
I
is
mean,
the one where was it Cretus where they're asking, "Hey, Socrates, we can go to jail." Um, I think that that's more as like
sure.
explicitly political writing.
But is
And
it political or is it about principles? I always saw.
yeah, yeah, sure.
I think Plato is a military guy. I mean, his family is close to the kind of more to
Yeah,
the
he
Spartan.
was in more.
Yeah, and he fought in wars, and I think all those supposedly political writing of Plato and discussions of city are mere backgrounds for what he really wants to talk about. And I'm not positing that there is a he who wrote this stuff, of course, it goes without saying, but really it's about the principles that you hold in certain kind of life situations, right? I mean, because there's no roadmap in Plato about a society. I mean, while in Aristotle there is. I'm
Yeah, I
s-
mean, here's the, like his letter, I think it's letter 7.
yeah,
That he
I'm sure
talks
there's some Plato
about
guy that's
actual
gonna watch
politics.
this and be furious that we
Well,
didn't
my
read.
the last Plato teacher I had said Plato was a constitutional monarchist, so there, that should settle it, right?
Sure, I mean, I would like to take a look at it. Yeah,
I mean, as much as I want to like hate on Plato, I don't think he's trying to create a place of direct, like a direct control
Hmm.
in that sense.
I don't think he is either, and I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting that. I'm saying, and I'm not even saying that it's value
This was
negative.
like when they had, what was it, the 30 tyrants, that he's aware of this kind of this thing. Aristotle, I mean, yeah, you can, let's bag on him more.
Sure.
I think Plato,
Again, I'm not talking about his intentions on it, or and I think that Sean, when you're bringing up, like, he's also talking about like the preconditions for friendship, like I would say that it is equally true of that, that like the physical proximity of people you don't have familial or intimate relationships with is sort of a precondition in order to have something like
yeah, no,
friendship.
that's Aristotle though. That's what I was referring to about friendship. And
I just mean to say that, like, I'm not sure that we can separate the idea of um of the city, the contemporary city,
sure,
from the enclosure process, even something that happens well after the enclosures. Like, it's in some potential way, or in some significant way, it feels like its most impactful uh effect is to keep us away from, what like David Harvey would call the right to the city.
no,
Like,
sure, I completely agree.
the city
yeah.
exists to make sure that regular people can't access it or
I
change it
just
or
think
sculpt it or
that's
anything.
Yeah,
too early though. I think the time of Plato is too early to talk about enclosures. Really?
Sure.
well,
Yeah. I'm not
yeah,
talking about it then. I was just talking about
Okay.
that
not
particular
even
time of
enclosures,
time.
maybe
Yeah.
more like movement of bodies in a biopolitical sense. I went on a walk around my neighborhood, historic neighborhood. Black Panthers used to meet down the street, and they're talking about when they built the freeways, it was closing off this neighborhood. All the rich white people left,
Yeah.
and everyone else stayed. And this, I was just listening to a podcast talking about this and about New York, when the guy designing who was the head of the parks, designed them just so that the buses couldn't get there. He made the bridges too short, so all these nice parks were accessible unless you had a car. And he was all about cars, even though he had a limo. He was driven around in a limo his whole life, so he never had to park. So he's like a big factor in why driving in New York sucks.
Hmm.
Yeah. You should
So
read The
there's,
Color of
yeah,
Law if you, yeah, for that
it's like you
land
see that
use
in modern
analysis.
cities. Sorry.
No, The Color of Law is a great book because the example they uses he uses is San Francisco. They and where are you across the bay? What is it called?
Oakland.
Oakland, yeah. With pictures and stuff, but it is very interesting, like where they zone the highways and all that. Yeah.
Mhm.
But I think there's something there with Plato. He would, like, the city would be designed so that the bronze workers would never, or the golden people would never have to encounter the bronze people because the walkways would be separate. So I
Yeah.
think maybe there's some kind of something there.
But I think Mark is saying that the Plato that we're fixating on is not his point, but more the idea of the city and whatnot.
Yeah, correct. The city that is capable of producing uh class and job distinctions.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how, like, Plato defines the city in the Republic.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I brought that up. Brought up Plato. Honestly, that it's not necessarily relevant, just as this sort of limited way to address the idea or to name the idea.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely see that because there's definitely a distinction of how the children are raised, who gets to rule, who
Mhm.
want to rule.
Yeah.
Right.
Extremely
Division.
communistic, but
Division of labor.
okay. Yeah, division of labor, but it very social.
Right.
Well,
And,
yeah,
Um,
and
for
in
the
here,
Guardians, isn't it just the Guardians that's like that, or is everyone?
But I think like the children are not raised by family units.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
I don't, yeah, of
Right.
any sense. They're totally, yeah. If I remember all this stuff correctly.
And then in the page, the next page of what we're on right now, it's talking about like the ways in which children in polyamorous, she calls it polygamous, but polyamorous relationships are like labeled according to different kinds of illegitimacy. And then, you know, earlier today, Sean, you're talking about whether they're going after the Indian Child Welfare Act, right?
Oh, yeah,
This is
yeah.
like ongoing legacy of the expropriation of children from indigenous people.
Yeah, and destroying, and that's goes back to the witch hunting where we saw they're destroying these kind of family units and replacing them with the kind of nuclear family. But in Plato's example, he's destroying the family unit and replacing it with the kind of this collective one to
Mhm.
kind of, if you're going to restart a society, you have to break these transmissions of knowledge, because you can't just teach them in school. Like I teach kids, like they're going to go home to their parents are going to tell them stuff, they're going to listen to them. So I'm not the only source there.
I think that was in The Ones Who Stay and Fight. That was their point too. Even though I disagree with the sort of severity to which Jemison takes that in The Ones Who Stay and Fight. Like, I think that's the fundamental idea.
Yeah, I guess just a distinction between those two would be like in Plato, it's like the children of its own society, right? But
Mhm.
with this we're looking at, or in Canada, we're talking about moving, right?
Mm,
Moving populations, right? You
right.
move girls from Quebec, from poor French families into nunneries, which then go expropriate children and move them somewhere else. It's
Right.
very, I mean, right? I mean, Oregon becomes a place where you bring children from Alaska,
Right.
and then you 80% of them end up in white families, um, of children that are separated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went on 229, if it's all right.
Yep.
And at this part, their objective was to intimidate the population to create a space of death. Oh, yeah, weird. Okay. Where potential rebels would be paralyzed with fear that they would accept anything rather than having to face the same ordeal of those publicly beaten and humiliated. Mark makes this point all the time. In this, the Spanish were in part successful, faced with the torture, anonymous denunciations, and public humiliations. Many alliances and friendship broke down. People's faith in the effectiveness of their gods weakened, and worship turned into a secret individual practice rather than a collective one. And as it had been in pre-conquest America, which is, yeah, kind of in a way lays the ground for certain forms of Christianity too. Of course, as it breaks the bonds of the other. I mean, that's a very interesting theory to me, what she's laying down.
Yeah, I wanted to read that footnote too.
Please.
It says,
13.
yeah, it's on Space of Death. This is the expression used by Michael Tossig in Shamanism, Colonialism, and the Wild Man, 1991, to stress the function of terror in the establishment of colonial hegemony in the Americas. Quote, whatever the conclusions we draw about how the hegemony was so speedily effected, we would be unwise to overlook the role of terror. By this, I mean us to think through terror, which as well as being a psychological state, also a social one whose special features allow it to serve as a mediator par excellence of colonial hegemony. the space of death where the Indian, African, and white gave birth to a new world. Taussig adds, however, that the space of death is also a space of transformation, since through the experience of coming close to death, there may be a more vivid sense of life. Through fear, there can come not only growth of self-consciousness, but also fragmentation and then loss of self conforming to authority. Yeah, which made me think of the shock doctrine, which I'm still reading. This kind of
Most definitely. Yeah.
breaking someone down, and then they're just gonna, or even like a Stockholm syndrome kind of thing, where now they're just ready to accept any kind of crumbs you give them.
Yeah, modeled on torture, and then I forgot if she includes this in later on editions of how the torture programs in America with the two psychologists, like I mean, they had never done shit themselves, but they use studies on dogs, of course. Specifically the practice of what is it, hopeless obedience, hopeless attachment, or something. Just like when you put dogs in like between two electrified walls, where the dog can't sit down and do anything without getting shocked, and then you remove them from that situation, and this bond is attached. Because I remember her book, she starts with torture, right? Especially in Chile and places like that, before talking about the Chicago school model. Although they are coinciding for the most part. Yeah, but this is kind of the same thing, right? Like the way this kind of Christian colonialism's function is breaking up all these modes of attachments and relations and social functions, but at the same time, it lays the ground for a new sort of belief, which is that kind of secretive, individualistic, navel-gazing Christianity that is to come to America and survive to this day, where you cannot embed any form of socialism into it. Doesn't matter how much Cornel West screams about it. Yada, yada, yada. While in the 1550s, people could openly acknowledge theirs and their community's attachment to the traditional regions, by the 1650s, the crimes of which they were accused revolved around witchcraft, the practice now presuming a secretive behavior. They increasingly resembled the accusation made against witches in Europe. The same campaign revealed that despite the persecution in the eyes of the communities, the ancestors and the walks continue to be essential to their survival. These are from Karen Spalding book. Yeah. Mark, did you say you want to go to the next page? There was, I guess you already talked about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I had a
With the
note on this
children,
one,
right?
which is about the, what does it say? Rather than having to face the same ordeal of those publicly beaten and humiliated, in this, the Spaniards were in part successful, and the parts in which they weren't is why we have biopolitics. Is because you can't actually whip a population into submission. It's just literally not possible. That's also what's talked about in the shock doctrine.
Except France.
It's not stable.
You use baguettes and hit them.
Right.
And that works.
You can't beat forever. You can beat for a while, but it's inherently unstable, and the amount of labor that goes into it is undesirable to those who want both control, absolute control, and an easy conscience, or at least to believe that people follow them because they are better than them or something like that. It's just unstable. And so like the ways in which the Spaniards were unsuccessful are the lessons was the lesson plan for creating a biopolitics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like this kind of like anecdote about World War II planes that came back, and they were like, the engineers were looking at them and be like, oh well, where all these planes got hit, oh, we need to put more armor there. But then someone was like, no, you don't need to put armor there. You need to put more, you need to put less armor there because they could get hit there and still survive.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's really a point, but that's just what I think of. That it's more, it seems more costly too to do all the whipping.
Mhm.
There's the next iteration of this process learns from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I learned how to like do derivatives of fear. Right? It's the fear of the possibility of the threat of the show of force. Right? The more like steps back you take. Something like that.
Yeah. Here, there's we're drawn to higher planes here. She says, while indigenous men often fled the oppression of the Maida and the tribute by abandoning their communities and going to work as yakunas, quasi serfs in the merging haciendas, women fled to punas, inaccessible and very distant from the reducciones of their native communities. Once in the punas, women rejected the force and symbol of their oppression. Disobeying Spanish administrators, the clergy, and as well as their own community officials. They also vigorously rejected the colonial ideology, which reinforced their oppression, refusing to go to Mass, participate in Catholic confessions, to learn Catholic dogma. More important, women did not just reject Catholicism, they returned to their native religion and to the best they could to the quality of social relations which their religion expressed. And this was kind of a modality of it. Again, you have some testimonials in this. I don't have anything more to say to those. Of course, she's focusing on women resistance, the European witches and the Indos. Is the next part. Again, I found this more to be. I guess this part was interesting. I don't know if you guys have anything from the earlier parts you want to.
I highlighted that same part that you did.
Okay, yeah, that's okay. Pariento's thesis is important since it helps us dispel the Eurocentrism that has characterized the study of the witch hunt and can potentially answer some of the questions raised by the persecution of the European witches. But its main contribution is that it broadens our awareness of the global character of capitalist development and makes us realize that by the 16th century, a ruling class had formed in Europe that was at all points involved, practically, politically, and ideologically, in the formation of a world proletariat, and therefore was potentially operating with knowledge gathering on international level in the elaboration of its model of domination. Yeah, I guess it's just I thought that was an interesting thing about that. Spread of capitalism.
Yeah, that's sort of the statement I was making about where the Spanish failed. We would lead to biopolitics through this process of the creation of the international scientific community, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because while kind of colonialism often appears as a realm of competition and land grab struggle, is also very much a place of sharing of a particular type of knowledge and technologies and the whole idea of Europeanness and European heritage later on develops out of it. not in this 18, even what we're talking about 19th century, really 20th century though. As for his claims, we can observe that the history of Europe before the conquest is sufficient proof that the Europeans did not have to cross the ocean to find a will to exterminate those standing in their way. It is possible to account for the chronology of the witch hunt in Europe without resorting to the New World impact hypothesis. Since
Yeah,
the
so
decade,
there,
yeah,
she's like saying, I don't know, I just pointed
please.
out in my notes that she's saying, look, it's the first paragraph you read is like in favor of his thesis, but then the second one, no, like Europeans are already doing this stuff is already happening. You don't need kind of this explanation.
Right.
Yeah, because I guess colonialism is, I mean, in colonial studies, I mean, these things have changed, but most up to recently, it is almost always taught as this kind of event that happens 16th century, right? I mean, it starts there. I mean, what she's doing, I mean, to us, it's a very natural way of looking at history because we're immersed in kind of Marxist studies and biopolitics and stuff. But she's kind of tracing it way back, right? I mean, this the story of this book like starts in 13th century.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, it's 16th century. They're like Ireland is being colonized by England, which is already colonized by like Saxons, and
Yeah.
Right.
not a thing that Europeans need teaching about.
Yeah. You know, she's bringing it far back, but she's not bringing it to like, you know, the pre-Bronze Age collapse or something like that. And it's important to make a distinction that say that like she is making a case that this is a and this is just me like preempting a critique that I think many will offer and have offered to Federici, is that she's just going back and picking a story to latch onto. And I don't think that choosing the Crusades is a particularly non-salient point to start with. Yeah, especially when, like, as you're saying, James, there's like lots of populations within the boundaries of Christendom that themselves, you know, we have the Christian wars against the Norse. We have the Carling Empire that like turns into the Holy Roman Empire, that starts off as some Thuringian or, you know, Saxon like invaders into Netherlands, and then sort of gets left behind eventually and becomes like a relic of an old era, and gets continuously reconquered by both France and, like, that's Alsace-Lorraine, by France and Germany fighting back and forth over the place that sort of started both of these places. There's a lot of this kind of intra-European tension, and like you're saying, Sean, it's told with a character of competition, but colonization is the way in which the competition is mostly ended and turned into a form of intra-European collaboration, Europe versus the world.
Yeah, to some extent, though. I mean, there are IR folks, you know, that are map out these disputes and the shapes, the philosophical shapes they take, and how they materially unfold, and that's always there in Europe. I mean, and then Europe in relation to United States and the world. But yeah, nevertheless, I mean, there's certain bonds that are stronger when you kind of consider the relational aspect of it. I mean, right now you see how suddenly NATO and the UN got reinvigorated because of what Putin did, right?
Right.
Things that would not half a year ago, you would not have expected, right? Like
Right.
Finland and Sweden, like these countries joining, and then you're talking about it, like Turkey being accepted, Turkey making a deal about the Kurds with some of these Scandinavian countries, how they treat their Kurdish immigrations. Um, but and these are the type of relations that could not have that did not reconfigure when the dispute was in Syria, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, um, um, there's something very intimate about colonialism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but to go back to
right.
Paranetto,
Yes. Yeah.
to this book that we're almost done with, yeah, I do. There's a point that extermination, it does take it. It is a change there from even the intra-European colonization or
Correct.
ancient empires.
Yep.
Rome expanded. It didn't kill everyone in its path.
Right.
That the Mongols might have. But anyway, I could think it's something due to it's. I mean, she doesn't mention it here, but like this is it's changing because there's new demands of capital.
Mhm.
You know, they need the land. They're not getting. It's not working out. Just taking tribute. So kind of extermination opens up as the political strategy, which is then
Mhm.
exported. So I think I'm on the agreeing with Paranetto there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that the sort of like, I guess this is another example of the colonial boomerang kind of effect is the witch hunts massively intensify as a result of interaction with the new worlds, because the the demonization gets a lot of fuel dumped on that fire, on that particular fire. But that's not where they started from, and it wasn't sufficient. Like interaction with the new world, right? That's her claim, is that the new world impact hypothesis
Mhm.
is not sufficient to explain the existence of the witch hunts, though it may explain, I don't know if she's saying this, but I would say, though it may explain why they intensify in the 16th century.
Mhm.
Or at least some part of it. While I think she is definitely saying that the changing demands of the capitalist labor relation and the fact that the European marketplace is no longer at a dearth of laborers, they're at an excess of laborers, is a huge part of it as well. Like, hence why colonizers, when you would never send out colonizers if your population was low.
Mhm.
You would instead prefer tributary relationships, because there you don't have to dedicate manpower to it or labor power to it.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and you're not just trying to like maybe empires before where you, like I just need to put my flag somewhere to kind of impress the other ones and just have this territory. You actually need it to make you money.
So I was just thinking of colonization as a big version of Notice Me Senpai.
Yeah. Well, it was for Belgium, I think.
Yeah. But I mean, if the Pope is senpai and you get that Treaty of Tordesillas in your favor.
yeah. Yeah, and of course, then there's like the disposition of the Jews that's happening here. They're all moving into Ottoman Empire and whatnot.
Right.
So yeah, I don't have anything else to say. I was gonna move to 236 because I think everything I wanted to touch on we've touched. It's a bit more talk of Christianity in that section. So witch hunting and globalization. Witch hunting in America continued in waves through the end of the 17th century when the persistence of demographic decline and increased political and economic security on the side of the colonial power structure combined to put an end to the persecution. Thus, in the same region that had witnessed the great anti-idolatry campaign of the 16th and 17th centuries, by the 18th, the Inquisition had renounced any attempts to influence the moral and religious beliefs of the population, apparently estimating that they could no longer pose a danger to colonial rule. In the place of the persecution, a paternalistic perspective emerged that looked at idolatry and magical practices as the foibles of ignorant people not worthy of being taken into consideration by les gens de raison. From then on, the preoccupation with devil worship would migrate to developing slave populations. Of Brazil, the Caribbean, the North America, where with King Philip's War, the English settlers justified their massacre of the Native American Indians by labeling them as servants of the devil. To be honest, the king was very cautious about not having conflicts with them, with settlers for doing their own shit. But yeah, anyways. And there is some discussions about the Salem, right? I mean, we have this quote here. And
I
please
do
stop me.
think that's interesting, though.
Oh,
Right, the end of that last paragraph you read, how the witch hunt, in terms of the indigenous people, is kind of becoming, oh, we were, that was a silly thing that we didn't really do at all, actually. Then it's kind of put onto the slave population, because
Mhm.
they're now the ones they need to kind of monitor
Mhm.
and control.
yeah.
At this point, the natives, through disease and all these other factors, and their own resistance, weren't like a suitable population for enslavement on a mass scale.
Yeah. And it says here, I've met with some strange things which have made me think that this inexplicable war, the war made by the spirit of the invisible world against the people of Salem, might have its origin among the Indians, whose chief Sagamores are well known unto some of our captives to have been hard sorcerers and hellish conjurers, and such as converse with the demons. Yeah, this is very interesting. This externalization of the supposed demonic existence, which you can easily justify as something that is springing from the very source you're trying to eliminate. This kind of reminded me of very much when liberals during the Trump era, had this. They're very much, the idea was that the genesis of Trump is in Russia, right? I mean, like, oh, the genesis of Trump is not only not conservatives, is liberal culture, right? I mean, it's the TV culture of the coasts, right? LA and New York. But that externalization before you move into eliminate.
And it gives a justification for eliminating. Look, we have to get rid of
Sure.
them, turning on people.
Yeah, because this thing is uncanny. I mean, I recognize it, but really it's external. It's infection is external. Rather than, and this is also, the Zizek's kind of discussion of like turds in the toilet, like in US, it's really there's a lot of water. It's so deep down there, almost, in Germany, whatever is floating. Whatever, it's funny. I don't care who you are, man. It's funny.
But I think this is a persistent idea in the US of this kind of native magic of something, because it made me think of Poltergeist, right? Like you built your house on a burial
All
ground.
those movies, yeah.
So I mean, that's all of them, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there was a very good Jacobin article about that. That the prevalence of house horror in the United States and the existence of course the logical explanation would be like, oh, market housing and the connection of family and whiteness, blah blah blah, to this kind of houses, because they're all like single family housing, by the way. They're all like zone A type of shit. But yeah, but in the movies, the explanation is always like, no, there's like Indian burial, or no, somebody did a pedophilia here or whatever,
Yeah. I mean, I think the Indian burial one in particular is feels what to say. I suspect that most people wouldn't care if it was a formally fenced Indian burial ground or if there were just bones of Indians there. And so there seems to be some pathologized fear of like the fact that the ground underneath us in the Americas is an Indian burial ground.
Yeah, I mean, by that logic, I mean, the whole fucking place should be haunted. I mean, you're
Right.
talking about millions and millions and millions of people.
Right.
That
I think
would-
that's what it's capturing.
I
So,
think in the movie they like dig up the bodies and move them somewhere. So you're right.
Throw
I
it
think
in the neighbor's yard.
I mean, maybe- well, through it in Canada's yard, you mean? Yeah,
oh God.
that's that.
Yeah, it says here in the 1840s, for instance, a wave of witch burning occurred in Western India. More women in this period were burned as witches than in practice of sati. That's a practice of burning of wife with a husband. These killings occurred in the context of social crises caused both by the colonial authorities' attack on the communities living in the forest, among whom women had a far higher degree of power than in caste societies that dwelled in the plains, and the colonial devaluation of female power, resulting in the decline of worship of female goddesses. This is, I guess, the Eastern colonial examples, and similar things are happening in Kenya, Nigeria, Cameroon, in the African continent. Then she fast forwards to kind of 1990s there, and IMF. Oh wow. 1980s, blah 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 blah. Yeah, there's a lot of examples. I guess the last thing I had was as Arthur Miller, she's the author of Crucible, the play, already saw in his interpretation of the Salem trial, as soon as we strip the persecution of witches from its metaphysical trappings, we recognize in it phenomena that are very close to him. That's how the book ends.
Yeah.
There's his testimonial.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that that was the intention of that book, but makes sense. So.
Yeah, I mean the book is more an analogy of the McCarthy trials, right? I mean, whatever, and all those guys are just pretty conservative, the playwrights. I don't know how.
Well,
Doesn't
didn't,
matter.
Yeah.
What did you say?
didn't Arthur Miller date Marilyn Monroe?
Man, if he did.
I don't know if that
On
makes sense.
page 236, I had something I wanted to bring up.
Oh, please. There we go.
So the block quote, the idol priests in Mexico anoint themselves in the following way. They grease themselves from the feet to the head, including the hair. The substance from which they stain themselves was ordinary tea, because from antiquity, it was always an offering to their gods and for this much worshipped. This was their ordinary greasing, except when they went to sacrifice or when they went to the caves where they kept their idols. When they used a different greasing to give themselves courage, grease was made of poisonous substances. Frogs, salamanders, vipers. With this greasing, they could turn into magicians, brujos, and speak with the devil. The same poisonous brew was presumably spread by the European witches on their bodies, according to their accusers, in order to gain the power to fly to the Sabbath. But it cannot be assumed that this theme was generated in the New World, as references to women making ointments from the blood of toads or children bones are found already in the 15th century trials and demonologies. What is plausible instead is that the reports from America did revitalize these charges, adding new details and giving more authority to them. And I highlight this because I think it demonstrates one of the characters of something like a witch hunt, where it is it's a very wide, it's a like shotgun tactic, and whatever sticks, you repeat. Whatever sticks more, you repeat again. And if you happen to find later confirmation of it, it's like a very strictly speaking confirmation bias. If you happen to find confirmation of it later, that only intensifies, see, we knew all along that was how witchcraft works. We even found it half a world away in another continent, right? Meanwhile, they're not tracking the misses, they're only tracking the hits.
Yeah, this is conspiracy theory logic. Alex Jones does the same thing.
Right.
Like, and it'll be like, say there's going to be false flags everywhere. Then something happens. Oh, look how right I was. It's,
Right. Plant enough seeds and a tree happens to grow where one of them grows and you claim responsibility for it. So,
yeah.
Well, I mean, in that case, you did plant the seed to it.
no, I'm saying if it's not related at all,
Yeah, kind of the old Bohemian Grove tactic. Yeah, well, that's all I have to say about this book. It was in good exercise, and glad it's over.
Yeah, glad I read it. Glad it's over. Been wanting to read it for a while.
Yeah. I'm very grateful you guys kind of got me through it. But yeah, I feel like I did enough Marxist reading for 2022. Yeah, but I'm gonna it's time to shift towards fiction and catch up with those. I know there's discussions about it. Was there after this? Was there any interest in those cases or anything?
do the cases. I mean, I think we could do one case each day, one case each time we met.
Yeah, one case each time we met, and we can give it a lot of time because those cases are a little long. But I think doing the Marshall trilogy would be very interesting because we we revisit American history, learn a bit of Indian law, and just American history. And judges are all failed writers, so they're pretty interesting. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm not really. I don't know much about legal stuff, and
You don't have to really, like, these cases
usually
pretty
more
much tell
interested.
you.
Usually more interesting in crime. On that side of it, but yeah, and make sure I know what I'm reading, and I'll be fine. I'll figure out something to say.
Yeah, and I highly, this is not important what that book about the chief wrote. I don't know, 10 Native American cases, 10 worst cases. He's very good because he takes a lot of these big cases and tells you a lot of scholarship stories behind how they came about, and kind of a little more that are available in the cases. So if you want to look at them. Okay, so yeah, let's do Johnson v. McIntosh whenever we do it. But as far as books I'm reading right now, plugging in, I'm reading The American Gods. I got the 10th anniversary edition, which apparently came out 10 years ago. Apparently, I have some more pages to it. Neil Gaiman's telling me it's just fun, Just not much thinking required. I'm also reading Dune. I was telling James,
Thinking.
I got a classic horror. What is it?
And Dune is thinking and no fun required, so get the opposites.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, by the third book, it's just yes. I gave up with Dune Messiah. After that, I was just like, I don't know. What number Duncan is this one? Like, the dude keeps coming back.
I think I read 14 of those books. I
Oh,
appreciated
you read
it.
the Sun stuff too, Brandon? And
Yeah, he's not a good writer.
no,
Giant.
but there is a good co-author on those, which I
It's
think.
Kevin whatever.
Okay, what is? How do I? What is it? Is it the Living Dead or whatever? Not Living Dead.
No, it's the guy that writes all the Star Trek books or Star Wars books. Kevin
Oh,
Anderson or something like that.
why do I know him then? I fucking
I
hate
don't know.
Star Wars.
He's a
Okay.
pulp sci-fi writer. He's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not neither the son nor the co-author really understood some of the really critical, like Frank Herbert wasn't just like randomly mashing together religions. He was like syncretizing religions that made sense together.
Yeah.
And
Oh
they're
my
just
God.
like,
Yeah.
oh, I can mix shit together too. They like do Kool-Aid religion. So it's pretty weird, but it's helpful because they're all sort of formed from a note. It's like, this is what House Atreides is like, and then write a whole book about it. So it gives some good, the nuance is relevant for understanding the total anti-fascist story that Frank Herbert was trying to tell with that. Because Atreides are the fascists and so are the Harkonnen. And he's trying to tell a story about, at least my read on it is that he's trying to tell a story about decolonization from above. And that comes through much more clearly when you read them all, even though the writing quality dips pretty dramatically after the like sixth book or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm down for that story. You could tell if you could tell it to me in like a book, that'd be cool.
It definitely could. It
Well,
definitely could be done in a Silmarillion style, which would be way more approachable. Just like, here's the deep lore. You read it and you'll understand it. Get away from the like the epic saga of
Right.
Yeah, the really, like we were talking about earlier, with Asimov and whatnot, and here we're gonna piss off a lot of people, but the the sort of the boring repetition of being told the same story over and over and over again.
Oh,
and
Jesus
while
Christ,
Herbert's great in some ways, like he fundamentally is kind of telling the libertarian white Jesus story again, which sucks. So
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I
it's
still like it,
it's
but
interesting.
For
Yeah.
Asimov, read the gods themselves. It's not. It's like his alien-ish story, and it's not robots. It's
Yeah, no, I read all those robot stories too. I read a couple of Foundation
the
stuff.
gods themselves is about like this alternate reality with these kind of aliens with like 3 genders. It's not like his other.
Yeah, it's just the stories are so fucking dry. I also need to finish Hyperions, man. I think I made it. I finished the first 2. I got a little bit in the third book, which were like that's where it gets really good. Then I stopped, but that's a lot of work.
yeah.
So that's where I am this summer, just kind of finishing.
I'll read the first one. I have it. I haven't.
First one is great. It's
Yeah.
like popcorn.
Hmm.
It keeps changing style, there's like noir, then it goes to like, space opera.
I want to say on the cases, one of the reasons I was into the idea of it is, what if we picked a book relatively soon and we read the cases, but we took the opportunity while we're discussing the cases to get a little bit ahead on the book? Like get halfway through a book and then start it so that we have a little bit of a lag built in.
What kind of book?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, whatever we want to do after Caliban and the Witch.
I think
So-
there's an optimum amount of time between me reading it and talking about it where I'm not like, I don't really,
Mhm.
it's not as fresh. I don't want to
Yeah.
be too fresh either. So, but I guess
Yeah.
it's, I can pace
But
myself.
I figure if we're gonna do three cases, we could do that in a month. And a month would be enough to get a head start. And the first section of whatever we read would be more of an introduction, and we'd sort of catch up like the anime catching up to the manga. We'd catch up pretty quick.
I guess
Well, that's a good example because animes will have like a whole episode. It's just like a meeting, and it's like really stretches out things sometimes. Like a reading group sometimes, where I have a whole one about the paragraph.
Sure.
I don't know. What I was like, the book I was gonna read was this: My Life as a Radical Jewish Woman, memoir of a Zionist feminist in Poland, which is like something that's been on my shelf for like since PSU time. Like that's the other book, because I was, like when me and James were starting, we were just going to be like, oh yeah, we're. Correct me if I'm wrong, James. Kind of had the feminist books that we have had sitting on our shelves that we need to finish.
Yeah, I don't know if we were like deciding on strictly feminist, but it kind of, I mean, because of modern, like contemporary current events kind of stuff pushed us that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we could do Shock Doctrine if you and I are both reading it, James, and you've read it before, Sean. I think it'd be fast to go through.
Yeah, and I still have that book, so yeah.
We're about halfway done, so.
I just don't think it's a discussion. I mean, do you think it's?
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Yeah.
There's not a ton in that. Or futures?
To theory.
Interesting. I like the approachability of it, and I always want to like pitch it just because I like want to do anything that will increase people reading it. But
Or
Well, how
futures,
about-
and James really likes it too.
How about instead of doing this right now, like we could like we'll all retire to our libraries and then like we talk
Yeah.
about.
okay.
Okay. I
Yeah.
do want to do
'Cause
something.
I'm like, I
though.
keep wanting to go over to the other side of the room and like look at what I have.
Like,
Uh-huh. I'll get like a GoPro and mount it on my shoulder so that you can see what I'm looking at as I'm going through my.
Okay, stop. Go back to the left.
No,
Be my
that's
boss.
lube. Move that out of the way.
Back into the left.
well, let me stop the recording. I
Well,
guess.
hold on, I was gonna edit and
Oh,
recommend-
sorry. Yeah. Please.
I just finished this one, Fiction Wise Little Brother by Cory Doctorow, who's cool. He's a comrade. Yeah, it's not even really science fiction because I think all the science is accurate. I don't know. He's like a tech security, cryptography, math guy. So what happens in the story is there's a terrorist attack in San Francisco. Then like Department of Homeland Security comes in and just basically takes over the city, makes into a police state pretty much. Does have a very like Bush era, like Bush 2 era feel to it. But as when I first started reading it, I was like, oh, this, it's kind of like dated, but then you're reading it like, oh, this could actually happen. This is like plausible in that way. But it's all about the main character is just like a teenage hacker kid who kind of is just evading the DHS and doing all these tricks. And what Mark mentioned at the beginning about minor crimes that throw off other crimes is they do that. They like kind of just switch up everyone's fast tag passes and their IDs, so people are getting like stopped for like just random things that they didn't do, like even
Right.
like class people and stuff. So really just kind of like throwing a bunch of chaos in there.
Just to create more surface area of interaction, for sure.
Yeah, like they stop people who have like weird bus routes, so they just make everyone look like they have a weird bus routes that are going all over the city.
What was the name of the book again?
Little Brother.
Oh, I get it.
I
Okay.
mean, I read another book by him called Walk Away, which is amazing. Love that book. And I'm also still reading for nonfiction this Murray Bookchin book that I was reading last week.
Oh. Will that three body problem generate any discussion, or do you know about this, Mark?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, I was
I
gonna
had,
read
I
that.
did a podcast episode with it and we talked and just about the first one. Talked about politics.
Okay. Anyways, just wondering. Yeah, go ahead, man.
And also Red Mars, possibly too.
Red Mars. Mark, you reading any books? Are you
Same
plugging
ones.
in anything?
I am reading, among others, and White Reconstruction and Shock Doctrine, and I just finished another one of the Becky Chambers books, and I was given this one that I'm going to start here in a day, Light from Uncommon Stars.
Heard it's good.
I've heard it was very similar to the Closing Common Orbit and Small Angry Planet, which is why the person gave it to me. So
Yeah, I just finished a book that reminded me of that Closed in Common Orbit. I don't know where I put it, but it's about an AI. It's by Amy Thompson called Virtual Girl. Actually, it's kind of like weird science, but from the robot's perspective. And I like it because she ends up being a traveler and meeting all these kind of houseless people and staying with like a drag queen in New Orleans. So it has like it's not like I was saying about other sci-fi stories, like in this, it's not the same story you've heard before, and it has lots of diverse characters. And I think it's a good kind of, does remind me a lot of Close in Common Orbit. I'm like, I see the similarities there about finding yourself.
Yeah. It's very feel good. It's a quality I haven't seen in a book in quite a while. So even though it's about like conflict, so appreciated it.
Feel good book. Cool. Well, this concludes our episode, right? Any last words, prayers?
Or season or series? Are you British? Or
Yeah, this first season's over. Come and see. All right, let me do this. I'm not good at these things.